249 murders in a single American city last year, not a war zone overseas. Not a country you'd need a passport to reach, a state capital in the United States in 2026. And here's the part nobody in polite company will tell you. You've been lied to about where the real bottom of this country lives. The evening news shows you a 5-second B-roll clip from Chicago and calls it a day. The tourism boards route your map app around it. Real estate sites quietly delist entire zip codes. And every corporate travel blogger swears the grittiest street in America is some artsy neighborhood in Brooklyn that has 3 coffee shops and a bookstore. What if I told you the actual worst pockets of the United States aren't in the cities you'd guess? What if they're in a town Charles Dickens once called a breeding place of death? In a neighborhood where police work 12-hour shifts because they're running on skeleton staff? In an entire municipality with fewer than 1,500 people that used to have over 15,000? Think you know the worst places in America? You don't. Because the worst places in America are the ones the country stopped talking about. Hit that subscribe button before we start. Let's break it down. Braddock is where Andrew Carnegie built his very first steel mill in 1875, and where he built the very first Carnegie Free Library in the country. It also happens to be the town where a certain United States senator with a hoodie and a goatee served as mayor for 13 years. Same guy. At its peak in 1920, Braddock had around 20,000 people. Today it has closer to 1,700. That is a 90% population loss. The Edgar Thompson Works is still running, sitting inside a town that mostly isn't. Here's the trade-off. Braddock is what happens when a town gets automated out of a job. The mill still runs. The people just don't. The tax base did what the workforce did, which is leave for anywhere with a functioning grocery store. And the crack epidemic showed up in the 80s like an uninvited guest and never gave back the spare key. Like this video, if you had no idea, a United States senator used to run a town that lost 90% of its people. Next up is a town so empty, a 19th century novelist used it as his model for hell. Pronounced Cairo, not Cairo. This tiny town sits at the exact confluence of the Mississippi and Ohio rivers, which sounds beautiful until you learn Charles Dickens visited in 1842 and was so revolted he used Cairo as the template for a hellish fictional city in his novel Martin Chuzzlewit. He called it a detestable morass. That was 184 years ago. It hasn't fully recovered. The numbers are cartoonishly bad. Peak population in 1920 was around 15,200. Today it's roughly 1,500. An 89% collapse, one of the steepest of any American town ever. Now, the trade-offs. Cairo's first grocery store in years opened in 2023 and closed in 2025. The Head Start program shut in 2024. Most of the downtown blocks aren't run down. They're just not there anymore. The buildings were demolished. When your groceries, your childcare, and your buildings all leave in the same decade, that isn't a neighborhood. That's a diorama of one. Comment below if you'd ever heard of Cairo before this video. Next up is a place John D. Rockefeller called home. Here's the whiplash. John D. Rockefeller, the wealthiest American who ever lived, kept his 248-acre Forest Hill estate right here. A century ago, East Cleveland was one of the richest suburbs in the country. Today, the median household income is around $22,000 a year. The data is grim. Population sits around 13,000 people, down roughly 30% since 2010. The poverty rate is close to 41%. Housing vacancy is above 25%. In 2018, it was ranked the 4th poorest city in America. Here's the trade-off. The city has repeatedly discussed dissolving itself and merging back into Cleveland because it cannot cover basic services. When your government's exit strategy is please absorb us, that is not a healthy real estate market. It's a cry for help wrapped in a zoning map. The same civic infrastructure that once served Rockefeller's neighbors now runs on fumes and hope. Subscribe because we're only getting warmed up. Number 10 is the town Bruce Springsteen wrote a song about. Bruce Springsteen released a song called Youngstown in 1995, and it wasn't a love letter. It was a eulogy. Youngstown was also once so mobbed up that a car bomb was locally nicknamed a Youngstown tune-up. That is not a phrase you want your city associated with. The data tells the whole story. Peak population in 1930 was 170,000 people. Today it's around 59,000, a 65% loss. About 40% of residents live below the poverty line. Now the trade-offs. On September 19, 1977, Youngstown Sheet and Tube announced mass closures that wiped out 5,000 jobs overnight. Within 5 years, roughly 50,000 steel jobs across the Mahoning Valley were gone. When you lose 50,000 paychecks in 5 years, schools shrink, grocery stores close. The Federal Bureau of Investigation didn't even fully break the mafia's grip on this town until the late 1990s. Your local news anchor has to reach for a thesaurus every time they cover Youngstown, because ongoing challenges only stretches so far. Like this if you're learning something. Number 9 is a Detroit neighborhood, so Blighted, a horror movie, was set there. The 2022 horror movie Barbarian, the one where a rental house has a secret you really don't want to find in the basement, is explicitly set in Brightmore. Locals call it something else. They call it Blightmore. When your neighborhood nickname is a pun on the word blight, that is what the marketing world calls a branding problem. The data is stark. Brightmore's population fell from around 26,000 in 1970 to roughly 9,300 today. Housing vacancy sits near 30%, and as of 2025, over 500 properties were still scheduled for demolition under Detroit's blight removal program. Now, the trade-off. The Detroit News once described dozens of drug dealers openly loitering on Brightmore corners, advertising their presence like they were running a lemonade stand. The city has spent hundreds of millions of dollars just tearing houses down, which is the reverse of how you build a neighborhood. Usually you knock down trees and put up houses. Here they knock down houses and let trees come back. Share this video with a friend who thinks their commute is bad. Number 8 was Baltimore's Harlem before it wasn't. Sandtown, Winchester was once called Baltimore's Harlem. Billie Holiday sang here. Thurgood Marshall walked these blocks. Diana Ross performed at the Royal Theater a few blocks over. In its prime, this was black culture at full volume in mid-20th century America. The data shows what happened after. About 30% of houses in Sandtown, Winchester are vacant or abandoned. Roughly 7% of young children have elevated blood lead levels. Median household income sits around $24,000. The poverty rate is over 50%. And this single Baltimore neighborhood has, in some years, sent more people to Maryland State Prison than any other census tract in the entire state. Here's the trade-off. Developer James Rouse poured more than $130 million into revitalizing Sandtown starting in the 1990s. The improvements were, to put it charitably, hard to see 2 decades later. When someone spends $130 million on a neighborhood and it still looks like the money went into a coin slot at a broken machine, that is a systems failure. The people here have held on through 6 decades of redlining, deindustrialization, and lead paint. What they needed was policy. What they got was press coverage. Comment which American neighborhood you thought would be number 1. Number 7 has the highest murder rate in Chicago, and Chicago has some serious competition. West Garfield Park has a section locals call K-Town, and here's why. Every street name starts with a K: Karlov, Keeler, Kildare, Costner, and more. Chicago city planners in 1913 decided to name streets systematically by how far west they were from the Indiana border. So the K streets aren't a coincidence. They're a 1910s urban planning experiment that never got renamed. The data is severe. In 2016, the neighborhood's murder rate hit approximately 172 per 100,000 residents. In 2024, 16 homicides among a population of just under 29,000 produced a rate of roughly 97 per 100,000. For scale, the national homicide rate is around 6 per 100,000. The University of Chicago Crime Lab found the 11th Police District's homicide rate over the 2010s exceeded Tijuana's. The trade-off is what came next: 1968 riots, heroin, crack, guns. The Chicago Sun-Times counted nearly 1,000 shootings in the community area over a recent 5-year window. When your neighborhood is named as a benchmark that a Mexican cartel city is beating, that is what marketing consultants call unfavorable positioning. K-Town used to stand for Karlov and Keeler. Now it also stands for something else entirely, and the city knows it. Hit like if you learned something new about Chicago. Next up is the town General Motors abandoned and then accidentally poisoned. Flint is the birthplace of General Motors. It's the site of the 1936 and 37 sit-down strike that created the modern United Auto Workers Union. Michael Moore made a documentary about General Motors abandoning Flint called Roger and Me in 1989. This town is not obscure. It's foundational, and it's also a disaster. The data hurts. Population is around 79,000 today, down from a peak of about 200,000 in 1960. Poverty runs around 34%. Median household income is roughly $37,600, and the median property value in Flint sits at $53,500. That is not a typo. That is the whole house. And now the trade-off. From 2014 to 2019, Flint's water supply was contaminated with lead after a cost-cutting decision to switch water sources. Children were poisoned, the pipes were corroding, and the state of Michigan spent years arguing about whose fault it was, while parents bought bottled water to bathe their kids. When your local government's biggest public works project becomes "please stop drinking the tap," you have crossed into a specific category of civic collapse. If a doctor tells you the tap water is fine and it isn't, you don't just take their word next time. You buy a filter, then another filter, then a whole different city. Subscribe if you want more of these deep dive reality checks. Number 5 is a Pennsylvania city, so broke it filed for bankruptcy. Chester is the oldest city in Pennsylvania, and here's the fact almost nobody knows. Martin Luther King Jr. attended Crozer Theological Seminary right here in Chester from 1948 to 1951. He was elected student body president. He graduated first in his class. The civil rights movement was, in a very real sense, incubated in the town on this list. The data is brutal. In November of 2022, Chester filed for Chapter 9 municipal bankruptcy, only the 31st American city ever to do so. Peak population in 1950 was around 66,000. Today, it's about 32,700, a 50% loss. The violent crime rate is roughly 831 per 100,000. Here's the trade-off. Chester's police department was so understaffed that Pennsylvania state troopers were brought in to help patrol in 2022. By 2024, the department was down to about 36 active patrol officers running 12-hour shifts. County Park Police had to be reassigned so Chester officers could actually walk beats. When your police department is essentially GoFundMeing itself with other departments, the cops won't enter alone thing isn't a marketing line. It's a scheduling reality. You have a staffing model that any human resources department would flag in any other industry as a lawsuit waiting to happen. Comment if you knew Martin Luther King studied in Chester. Number 4 is the birthplace of Miles Davis. Miles Davis grew up in East St. Louis. Ike and Tina Turner launched their career in its jazz clubs. Olympic legend Jackie Joyner-Kersee was born here. In the 1950s, this town was jazz royalty and industrial muscle stacked into one small city on the Mississippi. Once upon a time, East St. Louis had the Gateway Geyser, a fountain built to shoot water 630 feet in the air, deliberately matched to the height of the Gateway Arch across the river. It closed in 2023. The data is staggering. Peak population in 1950 was 82,366 people. Today it's around 17,800, a 78% population loss. Poverty runs near 33%. In 2019, the city recorded 37 homicides among a population of just 26,000. That is a per capita murder rate roughly 18 times the national average. The police department has, at times, run with just 36 full-time law enforcement employees for the entire city. Picture this. It's a Tuesday afternoon in a neighborhood where Miles Davis used to walk to school. The Gateway Geyser, which used to punch water into the sky higher than any American landmark, sits idle. A boarded-up club a few blocks over used to host some of the greatest jazz musicians in world history. Now it's just a building with plywood over the windows and a padlock. The Mississippi is still there. The music mostly isn't. Here's the trade-off. This is what happens when factories leave and 40% of the businesses follow them out the door in a single decade. It's not a moral failure of the residents. It's an accounting problem the size of a city that nobody at the state or federal level ever really tried to solve. And East St. Louis kept sending musicians and Olympians into the world anyway, which tells you something about the people that the numbers can't. Like this if you didn't know Miles Davis was from East St. Louis. Number 3 is the deadliest American city per capita, and it's a state capital. Jackson is the capital of Mississippi, home of Jackson State University, birthplace of the sound that put Southern soul on the map. And, according to local Jackson news analysis and Mississippi Today, Jackson currently holds the highest per capita murder rate of any American city with more than 100,000 people. In 2021, it recorded 160 homicides, a rate of about 101.9 per 100,000. For scale, the national homicide rate is roughly 6 per 100,000. Jackson's rate blazes past Memphis, past St. Louis, past Baltimore. In one recent year, Jackson accounted for more than half of every murder in the entire state of Mississippi. The city is also the fastest shrinking large American city, sitting at about 145,995 residents and dropping. The unique selling point, or rather the news hook, is that in 2022, Jackson became the largest American city to nearly run out of drinkable water. The treatment plants failed. Residents had to boil water or drive to distribution points for bottles. This is a state capital. Picture this. You're standing in front of the Mississippi State Capitol building at dusk. The dome is lit up. Statues of civil rights leaders line the block. 2 miles away, in the Georgetown neighborhood, a boil water notice is taped to a front door. The pressure is low. The pipes are old. The tax base moved out to the suburbs decades ago. And a policeman a few blocks over is on a shift that shouldn't legally exist under normal staffing rules. Here's the trade-off. Jackson State University's Mississippi Urban Research Center has documented severe law enforcement staffing challenges under a federal consent decree. When the department covering the state capitol can't cover the state capitol, cops won't enter alone is not a slogan. It's a Tuesday. Fair note, homicides in Jackson dropped 32% in 2025 per local reporting. Still worst in the country, but the arrow finally pointed the right way. Subscribe because you need to know this stuff, and your local news won't tell you. Number 2 is the birthplace of Michael Jackson. Michael Jackson was born and raised at 2300 Jackson Street in Gary, Indiana. The house is still there, fans still visit. And Gary today has a nickname among urban explorers, America's most photographed ghost city. There is an abandoned cathedral downtown, City Methodist Church, that is so hauntingly beautiful, it has been used as a film set. The whole cathedral, empty, trees growing out through the roof. The data is nation-leading in the wrong direction. NeighborhoodScout ranks Gary's crime rate at approximately 34 per 1,000 residents, worse than 98% of Indiana communities. Peak population in the 1950s was almost 180,000 people. Today, it's around 67,500. That is a 63% loss. The median household income is roughly $40,752, and Gary contains over 13,000 abandoned structures. The unique selling point is United States Steel. Gary was founded in 1906 by United States Steel Corporation and named for its chairman, Elbert Gary. This was the industrial capital of a nation. Now, roughly 1 out of every 5 buildings is totally abandoned, which is why the film industry keeps showing up. Gary looks like a movie set because you can rent an entire cathedral without asking anybody's permission first. Picture this. You're driving down Broadway at 8 in the morning. The Palace Theater marquee is still bolted to the wall, weathered and faded. To your left, City Methodist Church rises against the sky like a bombed-out European abbey, except it wasn't bombed. It was just left. Trees have grown up through the sanctuary. The stained glass is mostly gone. Wind moves through the nave the way it moves through an actual forest. Here's the trade-off. Gary's police department has around 150 sworn officers to cover a 50-square-mile city. When the city ran a homicide task force in 2023, it required multi-agency backup: Indiana State Police, federal firearms agents, and the United States Attorney's Office. Progress in the birthplace of the King of Pop. Comment where you're watching from. Number 1 is Philadelphia. Kensington was once called the workshop of the world. In the 19th century, this was one of the greatest textile manufacturing districts on Earth. Carpets, hats, steel. If you owned a hat between 1870 and 1920, there's a real chance a piece of it was made here. Today, McPherson Square, a Carnegie Library park in the middle of the neighborhood, has a nickname the librarians don't put in the brochures. Locals call it Needle Park. Here's the data. A federally funded study published in the journal Drug and Alcohol Dependence, sampling street drugs in Philadelphia from March of 2024 to March of 2025, found that among 260 samples, fentanyl was present in 98% and xylazine, the animal tranquilizer street name Trank, was present in 65%. Philadelphia recorded 1,413 overdose deaths in 2022. Kensington is where the vast majority of it happens. Journalists have called this the largest open-air drug market on the East Coast. The Drug Enforcement Administration has called Kensington the Walmart of heroin. Picture this, it's 7 in the morning. The Market-Frankford elevated line rumbles overhead. On Kensington Avenue, people are already visible on the sidewalks in various states of collapse from a drug so contaminated that a veterinary tranquilizer is now a standard ingredient. McPherson Square, which the Andrew Carnegie Foundation built in 1917 as a gift to a working neighborhood, is now the geographic center of an ongoing overdose crisis. The library inside is still open, kids still walk in, and around the outside, needles. Here's the trade-off. Residents told the Philadelphia Inquirer that police chase the dealers and users away. They come right back. The police leave, and it starts over. When your local police response amounts to a rotating door, "Cops won't enter alone" starts to sound less like a slogan and more like an operational description. This isn't a police failure at the officer level. It is a policy failure the size of an entire pharmaceutical industry that got away with something. And the neighborhood. The actual people who live in Kensington and are raising kids and going to work and trying to keep McPherson Square usable, is left holding the bag while the rest of America argues about whose fault it is. That is the worst ghetto in America in 2026, not a Rust Belt ghost town. A functioning American neighborhood that got sold out at the federal, state, and corporate level, and is still standing anyway. Here's the reframe. What you just watched isn't a ranking of bad neighborhoods. It's a ranking of American systems that stopped working. Steel mills that automated, water pipes that corroded, police departments that got de-staffed, pharmaceutical companies that were never held accountable. Every place on this list was somebody's boomtown once. Every place on this list has residents worth more than the numbers around them. If this video showed you an America you didn't know existed, hit that like button. It tells the algorithm real reporting still has an audience. Subscribe so you don't miss the next deep dive, because we go where the tourism boards don't. And share this with the one friend who thinks the whole country still looks like the postcards. Stay curious, stay honest. And whatever you do, stop letting the evening news tell you where America actually lives.